Government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m. Happy Friday and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. Coming up on today's show, we'll cross live to Newhaven, where 6 migrants have been taken to hospital after they were found in the back of a refrigerated lorry. We'll have all the latest on that. Ray Addison will be on site. Are we seeing a resurgence, a return to lorries being the best way into the UK? Now we're seeing a clampdown on boats. We'll have all the latest from Newhaven. Plus, of course, the morning after the night before, I'll have a look back on yet another miserable night for Rishi Sunak after the Tories lost 2 more crucial by-election seats ahead of what looks to be a carnage election coming up. And Prince Harry just can't keep his mouth shut, can he? This time he's been talking, yapping away to American television about the King's illness, and he's hinted that it could lead to a reconciliation with his father, and he might even become an American citizen. All that coming up on the show. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. And again, a happy Friday to you. Your company is always a pleasure. Now, the morning after the night before those by-elections, the dust is settling. Reform. Are they kingmakers, or are they rolling out the red carpet to Sir Keir Starmer, paving the way for him to get the keys to number 10? Later in the show, I'll be joined by Ben Habib in the studio for his first in-depth interview since he came third in last night's Wellingborough by-election, a record percentage, 13% of the vote. But is it enough? And anyhow, is it just granting Starmer a certain victory by splitting the vote? That will get very lively. Make sure you stick around for that and get in touch all the usual ways on that topic. I know this gets you very, very hot under the collar. Please get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com. Loads coming up. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 3 o'clock and leading the news this afternoon, the wife of Alexei Navalny has warned the reported death of her husband, she says, will not go unpunished. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference earlier, Yulia Navalny said Vladimir Putin must be held personally responsible for the atrocities he has committed. And her comments come after Lord Cameron said the Russian president had fabricated charges against his most vocal critic, which saw him exiled to a prison in the Arctic. Ukraine's president has also said it is clear Russia is to blame for Mr. Navalny's death, a claim that's been echoed today by US Vice President Kamala Harris.
If confirmed, this would be a further sign of Putin's brutality. Whatever story they tell, let us be clear, Russia is responsible, and we will have...
2 men have been arrested and 6 people have been taken to hospital after migrants were found today in the back of a lorry at New Haven's ferry port. GB News has been told that some of those found inside the truck do require medical attention. Emergency crews are currently at the scene and are assisting Border Force personnel who are leading that response. The Scottish leader of Labour says that the Tories are edging closer to what he called the far-right crankfest after his party scored a double win in by-elections overnight. Anna Sarwar's comments come as the Tories come to terms with winning with 2 devastating losses. Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with a 45.8% vote, the second largest by-election swing from Conservative to Labour since the Second World War. And that was just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan won Kingswood with just under 45%. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the results do show that the country wants change.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party. And last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go.
Well, meanwhile, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has admitted that while the circumstances facing his party, he says, are challenging, Labour, he says, doesn't have a plan.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan, because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
His new Kingswood MP was quick to blame what he called Rishi's recession for helping to deal a double blow to the Tories overnight. Damien Egan said that 14 years of Conservative government have sucked the hope out of the country. His comments came as official figures show the UK slipped into recession at the end of last year, with the economy shrinking by 0.3% in December. To royal news, and Prince Harry has suggested that the King's cancer diagnosis could lead to reconciliation within the family. Speaking to Good Morning America programme in the US, the Duke of Sussex said that he loved his father and that he was grateful to have spent time with him during a fleeting visit to London last week. But he told ABC News correspondent Will Reeve the conversations he's had with his father about his health will remain private.
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
What's sort of your outlook on his health?
That stays between me and him.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family. Absolutely. Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis.
And finally, Greece has become the first country with a Christian Orthodox majority to legalise same-sex marriage. Many LGBT campaigners struggle to contain their emotion as they watch the results unfold. The changes will also see same-sex couples given adoption rights in a rare show of parliamentary consensus. That's despite objections from church officials. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. Now we start with the show with the news that 6 migrants have been taken to hospital after they were found in the back of a lorry at New Haven Ferryport. 2 men have been arrested. Let's cross straight now to New Haven Ferryport and join our South East of England reporter, Ray Addison. Ray, a dramatic intervention and discovery. What's the latest?
Well, yeah, it really shook this community here. What is quite a sleepy ferry port in New Haven, seeing a huge response from emergency services, not just Border Force, but Sussex Police as well, and South East Coast Ambulance Service as well, sending several ambulances to the scene. Now, of course, the response was to migrants being discovered in the back of what is being described as a freezer lorry.
What is it, 19?
Believed to be on the Seven Sisters ferry, which came over from Dieppe in France earlier on this morning. South East Coast Ambulance saying they got the call about 9:40 that they were required to attend an emergency here. Now, we do know that 2 men have been arrested, one on suspicion of facilitating illegal entry to the United Kingdom, another for entering the country illegally, and that 6 migrants have been taken to hospital as well. Now, presumably, there will be concerns that the effects of being kept sealed up, potentially in the back of a freezer lorry at those freezing temperatures, could have had a negative impact upon their health. They've been taken to hospital, but so far no news of any fatalities, thankfully, at this stage. Now, of course, I was speaking to passengers as well. They were telling me that they were confused by the delay. They hadn't received a lot of information. They were being held up, waiting to begin their journeys to France. Now, I can tell you that the Seven Sisters ferry did leave this port of New Haven about half an hour ago, and actually locals here applauding to see it getting back on its way and have some normality come back to what I said is quite a sleepy port here. The local MP for Lewes is Maria Caulfield. She posted on X that she saw all of this drama unfold from the office of her constituency, rather from the window of her constituency office. She tweeted on X that she was very concerned by these reports and she thanked emergency services for their quick response. But those 2 men that have been arrested are remaining in custody, and those 6 migrants have been taken to hospital.
OK, thank you, Ray Anderson, live from New Haven. Of course, we'll have all the latest on that developing story throughout the show. Thank you, Ray. Now, to the fallout from yet another terrible night for the Tories. It turned into a horror show. Rishi Sunak is under even more pressure after the government lost 2 crucial by-elections. The Conservatives were defending majorities of 18,000 in Wellingborough and 11,000 in Kingswood, yet both seats fell to Labour last night. Is there any such thing as a safe seat left? The Prime Minister embarked on a damage limitation mission today, but he admitted the defeat showed the Conservatives have work to do to convince voters to back them at the next general election.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan, because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
How many times we hear that, stick with the plan, before the next general election? But before last night, Labour hadn't won in Kingswood since 2005, and their last win in Wellingborough was back in 2001.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party. And last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go.
So it's the morning after the night before, and I'm joined in the studio now by our political correspondent, Olivia Lee. Olivia, welcome to the show. As ever, it's a pleasure. There's no dressing this up, is there? It was absolute carnage for the Conservatives. In fact, even the most ardent supporters are saying they're bracing themselves for disaster. One prediction, if it carries on at the same rate as last night, Olivia, the Tories might be wiped out to 15 seats.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are so many terrible stats for the Conservatives in these two by-election results. Yeah, if the swing in Kingsborough was repeated across Kingswood, mix them up there, was repeated across the country, the Conservatives would be down to just a handful of seats. Obviously, that is unlikely to happen. You can't really extrapolate like that from a by-election. In by-elections, people are more willing to go out and vote as a protest. Incumbents don't often win, etc., etc. But that doesn't take away from the very real fact that this was a terrible night for the Conservatives. And, of course, it's not the only terrible night for the Conservatives in recent times. In the last 7 months, the Conservatives have lost a whole swathe of by-elections across the country. And as you said in your introduction there, it does feel now as though there isn't really such a thing as a safe seat for Conservatives anymore. The Conservatives will say that, well, for a start, the local politics in these by-elections were particularly bad. The Conservative Association in Wellingborough chose to have Peter Bone, the disgraced MP's, former MP's girlfriend, as their candidate. And apparently on the doorstep, that caused a real drag on the vote. The other sort of chink of hope for the Conservatives, if you can call it that, is that there wasn't a huge swell of support for Labour. And that's a pattern that we've been seeing time and time again. Yes, Labour keep winning with these huge swings, but that's mainly because turnout is very low. And what I mean by that is that Conservative voters aren't switching over to Labour, they're simply staying at home. The turnout in these two by-elections was under 40%, which is similar to the ones that we saw back in the summer. But at the end of the day, elections are won and lost by the people who are turning out to vote. And if the Conservatives can't get their voters to come out to the polling booths at an election, well, then it's goodbye to Rishi Sunak. The other big story of the night, of course, is reform. This is the first time that some of those polling figures that we've seen to reform have actually been realised in a vote. Reform got 13% of the vote in Wellingborough. That is impressive. They've leapfrogged the Liberal Democrats, and definitely they are taking away from the Conservative vote. In Kingswood, if every single Reform voter had voted for the Conservatives instead, the Conservatives would have clung on to the seat. What it actually means for Reform, well, I think you're going to be speaking to Ben Habib, I think, later. Is it really good enough to make a real difference to that party's prospects? It's not clear. But one way or another, the Conservatives are having a very bad time indeed. OK, thank you, Olivia. Leanne, on that point now, let's go straight to the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party, James Daly. James, welcome to the show. Not the best night for the Conservative Party, but one thing that leaps out of this, James, the winner last night was the none-of-the-above party. Apathy seems to be the enemy.
Well, I think you and Olivia have just discussed really and highlighted the main issues that come out of this by-election. 63% of people who voted in 2019 didn't vote this time, Martin. And the challenge for the Conservative Party, as well as all other parties, is to ensure that we have a manifesto, a set of policies that when it really matters, when it really comes down to it as to who's going to run the country after a general election, that can inspire people to come out. You know, I believe, and I'm here as the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, and believe with all my heart that for the good of my country, for the good of my town, for the good of the people that I represent, whether I'm here or not, that Rishi Sunak is the only leader who has a plan to address immigration, to address the economy, to ensure that we have a growing economy where everyone has access to high-paid, to high-skilled jobs. To make sure that we tackle the scourge of worklessness, to get people back into work, which we're doing at this moment in time. So that's what this election is going to be about when the general election, when it comes up. We have some unique, should we say, local circumstances here, and I'm sure we can talk about that a bit more, Martin.
James, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, keeps saying, we've got a plan. Let's stick with it. But the plan doesn't seem to be working, James. Is the plan better improved by changing leader and not sticking with Rishi Sunak?
Well, no, absolutely not. Real wages have been going up for 6 months. Inflation has gone down from 11 to 4%. We've had to make some difficult decisions. It's been a difficult period for the country, but there's more money coming into people's pockets. We've seen the beginning of banks and building societies reducing mortgage rates. Independent commentators are saying two things: that it is likely towards the end of the year that we're going to see more interest rates coming down, and secondly, that our economy is going to grow more than every other economy in the G7 going forward. So all the signs are there that we are going to have better times ahead. It's been a difficult period relating from the, going back to the pandemic and all the money we had to spend, the challenges that Ukraine has brought. But this is a Prime Minister with a plan that he's going to deliver, Martin.
OK, thanks for joining us, Conservative Party Deputy Chair James Daly. Always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the show. Now it's time for the Great British Giveaway and your chance to win £18,000 in cash. And here's all the details that you need for a chance to make that Wonga yours.
There's still time to become the winner of our Great British Giveaway. There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won. Totally tax-free cash that you could do whatever you like with. That's like having an extra £1,500 in your bank account each month for a whole year. It could go towards your mortgage or rent, buy monthly treats, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Great stuff. Now, Prince Harry has talked about his meeting with the King following his cancer diagnosis last week. And after saying that sickness brings families together, could a royal reconciliation be on the cards? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's 3:22. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I'll tell you about the fake audio of Sadiq Khan making inflammatory remarks ahead of Armistice Day that he says could have caused serious disorder. But before that, Vladimir Putin's biggest critic has died in prison. Alexei Navalny fell ill after a walk, almost immediately lost consciousness and died soon afterwards, according to prison authorities. Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron says Putin should be held accountable for Navalny's death. And the president of Latvia said Navalny had been brutally murdered by the Kremlin. Well, I'm joined now by Charlie Peters. Charlie, Putin's biggest critic mysteriously dies. This smells a bit fishy, doesn't it?
That's right, Martin, and it comes some 4 years after Navalny was first taken seriously ill after what a media report at the time established was almost certainly a Novichok poisoning. Novichok being the nerve agent most commonly by the Russian authorities, in particular the FSB, the successor of the KGB. You'll recall that in 2018, the nerve agent was detected when it was used on the KGB double agent Skripal in Salisbury. And so this is the allegation being made today that Navalny could have been poisoned in this sudden death reported this morning. Earlier in the week, his mother said that she spoke to him on the 12th, on Monday, where he looked alive and well and healthy. But the report from the Russian prison service said that he lost consciousness shortly after a walk. We also heard from sources at the local hospital in Karp, which is where the IK3 penal colony is, where Navalny was being held since the end of December. They said they tried to resuscitate him for over 30 minutes. That penal colony in the Arctic Circle, some 1,200 miles northeast of Moscow. It's one of the many jails he's been held in since he returned to Russia after that poisoning in January 2021. Well, in the last hour, we heard from Lord David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary in Munich for the security conference, the so-called Davos of Defence, who said that Putin must be held accountable for these developments.
Well, Alex Navalny was an incredibly brave fighter against corruption, and he gave up everything in campaigning for what he believed in. And my heart goes out to his wife and to his family. And we should be clear about what has happened here. Putin's Russia imprisoned him, trumped up charges against him, poisoned him, sent him to an Arctic penal colony, and now he's tragically died. And we should hold Putin accountable for this, and no one should be in any doubt about the dreadful nature of Putin's regime in Russia.
Well, Lord Cameron's comments there came after widespread international condemnation, with the Latvian president saying that Navalny was brutally murdered. Earlier this afternoon at the Munich Security Conference, we also heard from his wife, Yulia, who gave a speech after Kamala Harris, saying that if this news was confirmed, saying that we couldn't trust Putin's propaganda, then the international community must unite to fight Putin.
Thank you, Charlie Peters, on that update. And world leaders are lining up to condemn Putin, and the Kremlin says it has no information on his death. Thank you, Charlie. Now, moving on, Prince Harry can't help himself, can he? He suggested the King's illness could lead to a reconciliation with his father. And Harry was talking to Good Morning America.
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
What's sort of your outlook on his health?
That stays between me and him.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family.
Absolutely.
Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis.
Well, there we go, and I'm joined now by GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Cameron, welcome to the show. So, he finally speaks out on a ski slope on national television in America. Touching.
Yeah, I must admit, Martin, I was incredibly surprised when I heard this interview was happening, because this entire week has been about a rebrand for both Harry and Meghan, them appearing to want to get away from the royal titles, even though the, of course, whole website is branded Sussex.com, which is a royal title. But the fact that it was teased that he was going to be talking about His Majesty's health rang alarm bells for me, and I suspect probably it rang alarm bells for Buckingham Palace. However, Prince Harry did refuse to go into any private details about his father's condition, which would be a welcome relief for Buckingham Palace. He talked about rifts potentially healing. He said he loved his family and he was grateful that he could fly over to the United Kingdom to see his father, having learned of his cancer diagnosis. But of course, that's all the headlines now, isn't it? Him talking about his father and his health, rather than the purpose of the interview, which was to shine a light on the Invictus Games, his games set up in 2014 to support wounded veterans, a very worthy cause. But of course, all the headlines are now about his father. But to be fair to Prince Harry, he did look pretty uncomfortable answering those questions about his father's condition, but he did put himself in a situation where he was in front of a camera with a US journalist who inevitably was going to ask about his father and his relationship with the royal family.
Yeah, part of his global privacy tour, speaking out once again on national television. Still, there is a crumb of comfort. He wants dual citizenship in America, so he might stay out there.
Yeah, he says he's considering becoming a US citizen, although he said it's not a priority, which is perhaps slightly ironic, because next week there's a hearing in the US about his US visa. Remember, there's a whole row about the fact that did he lie or not on his US visa form, because of course he admitted drug use in his memoir Spare, and you can't get a US visa if you admit drug use. Prince Harry, we have had no details about what he put on his visa form, but that of course is all happening next week. So that, plus considering a US visa, it's all going to be one to watch next week.
It certainly is, and it just rolls on and on. Please get in touch out there, viewers. Thank you, Cameron Walker, by the way. Superb stuff, as ever. Please get on touch with us about the fact that there he is again. He hasn't spoken at all about the King's cancer. He hasn't spoken at all emotionally about it. He went to an NFL Awards. He went to the opening of an envelope at the Bob Marley premiere in Jamaica, while, by the way, telling us that we should lessen our carbon footprint. He takes a private jet. And now there he is again, speaking out on national television about such things. I mean, he's just an absolute clown, this fella. I'm sorry to have to say that, but there we go. And there's still lots more to come between now and 4 o'clock, including John Lewis is one of the country's favourite stores, isn't it? But why on earth is it now selling sex toys? And just to make matters worse, today it emerges in its staff magazine. It's giving out 70,000 staff members across the UK advice, wait for this, advice on how to bind the breasts of transgender children, because John Lewis has been infested by Stonewall and mermaids, of all places. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. Just gone 3:30. The headlines this hour. The wife of Alexei Navalny has told reporters that the death of her husband will not go unpunished. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, Yulia Navalny said Vladimir Putin must be personally held responsible for the atrocities that he's committed. And her comments come after Lord Cameron said the Russian president had fabricated charges against his most vocal critic, which saw him imprisoned at a penal colony in the Arctic. Ukraine's president says that it's clear Russia is to blame for Mr. Navalny's death. And that's a claim also echoed by US Vice President Kamala Harris. Here in the UK, 2 men have been arrested and 6 people have been taken to hospital after a group of migrants were found in the back of a freezer lorry at New Haven's ferry port. Emergency crews are currently at that scene and they're assisting Border Force officials who are leading the response to the incident. Labour scored a double win in by-elections overnight, inflicting a devastating blow to the Conservative Party. Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with a 45.8% vote, the second largest by-election swing from Conservatives to Labour since the Second World War. The stunning result came just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan won Kingswood with just under 45%. And Prince Harry has suggested the King's cancer diagnosis could lead to reconciliation within the royal family. Speaking to Good Morning America in the US, the Duke of Sussex said he was grateful to spend time with his father during a fleeting visit to London last week, but he says conversations about the King's health would remain private. And for the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a look at the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2580 and €1.1682. The price of gold is currently £1,594 and 25 pence, that's per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,702 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Sam. Now, Labour are celebrating after two big by-election wins last night. I'm going to get reaction from a Labour MP right after this. I'm Labour. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a Conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, one year you spend £100 and the next year you spend maybe £101 as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever
right.
it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. 3:37. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now let's get more reaction to Labour's 2 by-election wins last night. And I'm now joined by the Labour MP, Steve McCabe. Steve, welcome to the show. You must be cock-a-hoop this morning, Steve. No such thing as a safe seat, it seems anymore. Big swings are the new norm. Is the Labour Party getting ready for Downing Street?
Well, I don't think that's the conclusion we're drawing. I think we'd say they are 2 excellent results. They show how good the Labour campaigns were, and they show how disillusioned with the Tories people are. But, you know, we haven't had the general election yet, and as Keir Starmer said this morning, we're going to fight as if we're 5 points behind.
Steve, let me put this bluntly. Is Sir Keir Starmer turning out to be the least bad option on the voting ticket at the moment? I mean, the biggest winner last night was the none of the above option. Apathy seems to be the first choice of voters, and people seem to be voting for the Labour Party simply because they're not voting for anybody else.
Well, strangely enough, that's not my conclusion. Actually, I don't think apathy was that big an issue. I mean, the turnouts were, what, 37 and 38%. That's about average for a by-election turnout these days. Nothing unusual about that. And, you know, look at the size of the swings to Labour. So if that's the least bad option, it must be a very popular option.
Okay, Steve, do you think it'd be nice to send a bottle of champagne to Richard Tice at the Reform Party? After all, he seems to be doing a lot of the Labour Party's job for you by taking votes away from the Conservatives. Is he helping the Labour Party get into number 10?
Well, I was listening to Pat McFadden a moment ago, and I think Pat made the point. Look, we would have won those by-elections even if all the Reform votes had gone to the Tories. So, no, I don't really think that's a factor. You know, it is true that some disillusioned Tories are going to Reform. I don't think there's much doubt about that. But I don't think it's a big factor in terms of how we should approach things.
And Steve, when you look upon last night's by-election results, which, you know, there's no glossing over it, it was a terrible night for the Conservatives, and then you hear Rishi Sunak saying we need to stick to the plan. How does that make you feel?
Well, I mean, I think it's Rishi Sunak who needs a reality check, if I'm honest. I mean, he's now lost more by-elections than John Major. I think that was the 10th since 2019. He's got a plan that isn't working. I mean, inflation is still double the target. It's stalled now. Growth has stalled. We're in recession. Last week it was 2p tax cuts. Now we can't afford that. Employment's slowing. Universal credit claimants are up. His plan is a plan to nowhere.
And Steve, the Liberal Democrats last night sank like a stone, sank without trace. Is that an emergence of the fact they weren't really trying in seats where the Labour Party were odds-on favourites to win, and we can expect to see a bit more of that tactical working between the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party as we approach a general election?
Well, there wasn't any tactical working that I'm aware of. I mean, I think the Liberals have always chosen, you know, to pick or you know, the by-elections where they think they've got the best chance. I think that's true. I suppose something that was interesting last night was that the Greens didn't have much of a showing, and all those people who've been trying to make issue about Labour's Green Prosperity Plan, it wouldn't appear that's had much traction with the voters. So, no, I mean, I think overall you have to look at last night as 2 brilliant Labour campaigns. People went for the only viable alternative to the Tory government. People have shown their disappointment with the Tories, and they've shown that they believe that the changed Labour Party is getting ready for government.
OK, Steve McCabe, Labour MP, thanks for joining us. I'm glad that I made you laugh 3 times in that interview. I think you're clearly in a good mood. Enjoyed the moment. Steve McCabe, thank you for joining us on the show. Now, in a few minutes, I'll talk about the made-up comments from Sadiq Khan that he said could have caused serious disorder. But first, in a new GB News series, Innovation Britain, we're looking at the successes of British manufacturing around our marvellous country.
Today we are at Middlesex Aerospace in Basingstoke, and I'm joined by Lawrence Fold, the owner of the business. And I want to find out, Lawrence, why engineering is so important to the UK.
Well, engineering, and aerospace engineering in particular, produces a whole series of very well-paid, interesting jobs. The products that were all made in this factory, ultimately speaking, pretty much all go abroad. Even though they're integrated into systems in this country, but they'll wind up in Airbus, Boeing and other major aircraft facilities around the world. So exporting is really important.
Are we becoming competitive globally?
We remain competitive globally. Just because areas have got cheap labour, it doesn't mean that they're very good at producing sophisticated components. And it's that we do here, is produce technology at the very high end of manufacturing.
And how are we addressing the skills gap, and how important is this?
We've had our own apprenticeship programme every year since 1950, so we continue to train here, train our own apprentices, and build the skills of our own people. That's been really key to our success over the years, and as a national thing, training and education for all of our people is very important. I mean, it's very much a truth to say that if you think education is expensive, try ignorance.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it? Are they...
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking longer. The overall result is that we're not better off. The killer point here is 57% of the public would now vote to remain. 33% would leave. Surely that's the telling point.
It depends on the pollster, Charlie, because we were talking to a very good pollster earlier who said there's no enthusiasm for any change in a year. Maybe 10 years, they might be thinking about it.
Belinda de Lucia, let's bring you in. I'm sure you want to react to what Charlie said.
I mean, who would have thought that the UK wanting to run its own affairs and making our politicians more accountable would be so revolutionary? EU Parliament voted a majority to get rid of the vetoes, the last remaining scraps of democracy that the EU had. Now, luckily for EU citizens at the moment, you know, it means a treaty change to actually go forward. But that is the mood. The ever closer union. We have dodged a federalised, globalist, international, power-gobbling, anti-democratic organisation, and that's worth more than a few trade and travel perks for a few wealthy people in this country.
Hear, hear. Belinda de Lucia, Charlie Mullins, great to see you both.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:46. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News on this Friday afternoon. Now, in the next hour, I'll speak to a Labour MP and I'll be joined by Reform UK candidates Ben Habib, Deputy Leader of the party, to get their reaction to last night's by-election results. But before that, What on earth is going on at John Lewis? First, the UK's favourite department store started selling sex toys earlier this week. And now, in its in-house magazine, it's giving advice on breast binders for children. You heard that right. I'm joined now by the commentator and writer James Essers. James, welcome to the show. It's always a pleasure. This is a story that you broke, that came to you. What on earth is going on? Share with GB News, please.
I mean, what's gone on can only be described as a kind of diatribe of ideological propaganda from the upper echelons of John Lewis. They don't seem to give a damn about their workforce or indeed their customers or anyone who disagrees with them that a man can become a woman or that children should be given breast binders. I mean, it's really quite concerning.
And the specific advice seems to, once again, have been shoehorned in to John Lewis by the same old organisations, Stonewall and Mermaids. Is this an example, James, of yet another institution, yet another brand that's been captured by this trans ideology? And if so, why?
Oh, completely. And they're quite proud of it. I mean, they make a whole song and dance about how well they fared in Stonewall's, employer ranking scheme and all the rest of it. You know, the fact that they're referring parents of quite vulnerable children towards an organisation, Mermaids, that's being investigated by the Charity Commission for safeguarding concerns really has to make you question what on earth is going on here. And I think really it's not just shamelessly pursuing profit through virtue signalling, although I believe that's part of it. But I think part of it is simply that the senior management and John Lewis really believe this stuff. And that's even more concerning, actually, because it flies in the face of what we know to be reality.
But, James, another thing that comes to the fore here is they're out of touch with reality, with their customer base. James, there's been a massive backlash to this. I've noticed today on the Conservative websites, on the Daily Telegraph, on the Daily Mail, mainstream newspapers, customers withdrawing their custom, their loyalty cards getting thrown in the bin. There seems to be a bit of a backlash to this, James.
I know, and you think they would take heed of that, but seemingly not. I mean, boycott John Lewis has been trending on Twitter. I've, seen thousands of messages from customers saying they won't shop there anymore. I mean, I myself was a former customer. I enjoyed, frequenting Waitrose on a weekly basis, but I've said to my wife, no more. We cannot go there while they're pushing this type of nonsense on staff and customers. But they don't seem to care. And the statement that they've put out in response to all of this is extremely defensive. They attempt to try and justify what they've done. So I say we vote with our feet and hit them in the pocket where it's really going to hurt.
But, James, from the top of the Army, the Navy, the Home Office, the Church of England, down to department stores, this now seems to be, James, a complete orthodoxy, a new ideology, a religion even, and it's omnipresent.
Oh, I mean, completely. And, part of the issue is that people feel far too afraid to question it. I was contacted by a mother of her son who just started working at John Lewis a few months ago. And on his second shift, his kind of supervising staff member asked him where his pronoun badge was. And when he asked whether it was mandatory to wear one of these, the response was, well, no, it's not mandatory, but if you don't wear one, it's considered to be transphobic. So this is the type of fear of God that we are putting into people if they step out of line and dare to say things as controversial as a man cannot become a woman. But that's kind of the fear that's being created out there, which is why people have to speak out and step up, because otherwise this simply is not going to change.
I think you're right, James. And this happens at my son's school. When he was 13, their teacher said, you need to put the pronouns on the front of your book. And my boy came home, he said, Daddy, what do I do? I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, well, I don't really want to do it, but I feel if I don't do it, I'll be labelled a transphobe and I'll be ostracised and I'll lose my friendship groups. And isn't that the problem, James? That even if people feel compelled or they feel this is wrong, they're simply too afraid to speak out.
Well, of course, and the casualties are there to see. I mean, how many people have lost their jobs, kicked off university courses? I mean, I myself have been a victim of this, and then having to spend years in litigation on the basis of discrimination against their beliefs. So, yes, but we do have to kind of push back and turn the tide against this. But my biggest concern is for children. And that's why I really honed in on this comment around breast binders, because, I mean, what an abhorrent disgrace for a bunch of people who have no qualifications in medicine or therapy to be suggesting that the answer to a young girl's disease in her body is to bind her breasts. I mean, it's an utter disgrace, actually. There are no other words for it.
James, as I think many people will agree with you, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. And we do have that comment. A spokesperson for the John Lewis Partnership said they're a welcoming place for people to work or shop irrespective of their background or beliefs. The magazine was not edited or funded by the management of the John Lewis Partnership. Now, moving on to the latest example of the dangers of artificial intelligence. And now Sadiq Khan says deepfakes could have a decisive effect on a general election. He says a fake AI recording of him supposedly making inflammatory remarks in the run-up to Armistice Day protest last year almost caused serious disorder. And joining me now to discuss this is the philosopher Dr. Henry Shelvin. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shelvin. So we're hearing more and more about this. Are they likely to affect the outcomes of elections, though?
It's certainly possible, but I should also stress that misinformation in its current form may be new in some ways, but as a phenomenon, misinformation has been around for a long time. Any of your viewers in Hartlepool might be familiar with the story of Hangus the monkey, the shipwrecked monkey who was hanged by the residents of Hartlepool under the belief he was a Frenchman. That story is itself, interestingly, a bit of an example of misinformation. And we've had many other cases in history of panics caused by false rumors and so forth. And even in other domains like photography, people may be familiar with the fact that Stalin famously edited his political opponents out of photographs. So misinformation is as old as there have been human communities. And even in this case, it would have been entirely possible, of course, for someone to have done simply a good impersonation of Sadiq Khan and recorded that. Now, all of that said, AI is certainly making it much easier for people to produce misinformation at scale. We saw just yesterday OpenAI reveal their new video creation tool, Sora, which is not available to the general public yet, but it looks like it can create pretty much perfect video. So once these tools do start to make their way into the populace, we probably will see a new flood of this kind of material.
OK, superb. We're going to have to leave it there simply because we've run out of time. Thank you, philosopher Dr. Henry Shelvin, on the encroachment of deep fake AI. And I think it will be a part of the political backscape to the next election. We saw Keir Starmer, a fake of him having a Barney on a staff member, turned out to be completely fake. And it has to be said, the Sadiq Khan was pretty convincing. Now, moving on, 6 migrants have been taken to hospital after they were found in the back of a lorry at Newhaven Ferryport. 2 men have been arrested. We'll be live on the scene with Ray Edison for all of the latest on that. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, I'm Alex Bergill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. We do have some pretty wet weather on the cards as we go through later tomorrow, but for the time being, it's a largely dry picture. That's because we do have a weak ridge of higher pressure across the UK, and it's this that's quietened things down a little bit. That being said, there are still some showery outbreaks of rain around at the moment, and a few of these will continue as we go through the end of the day. Some clear skies through the start of the night, particularly towards the east, before a swathe of thicker cloud pushes its way into western parts, and this is likely to bring some drizzly outbreaks of rain, particularly in the west. For most, though, staying relatively mild, perhaps a little fresher than some recent nights, but temperatures in many places holding up in high single figures, if not double digits. The best chance of any sunshine tomorrow will be across parts of Scotland and in the east first thing. However, it is going to turn increasingly cloudy as we go through the day, and so sunshine will become a bit more limited. A few spots of drizzly rain for a time before this swathe of wetter weather feeds in from the west, and this could cause some localised flooding in a few places. Again, a mild day, temperatures well above average for the time of year, highs of around 15 or 16 Celsius. A bit of uncertainty as to how quickly that rain pushes eastwards and clears away, but it is likely to push away as we go through Sunday morning, but could be a wet start, at least in the southeast. Otherwise, Sunday does look like a largely dry day, just a few spots of rain around before something more unsettled comes next week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week. And it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had, obviously I was in no pain or anything like that, I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions. We did not experiment with nitrogen, but what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m. Happy Friday and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Today, we'll cross live to Newhaven, where 6 migrants have been taken to hospital after they were found in the back of a lorry. And I'll take a look back on yet another miserable night for Rishi Sunak after the Tories lost 2 more crucial by-elections. And Prince Harry just can't keep his trap shut, can he? This time he's been talking to American television about the King's illness, as you do, and he's hinted that it could lead to a reconciliation with his father. But there's good news. He might become an American citizen and stay over there. That's all coming in your next hour. So welcome to the show. Thank you for your company. It's always a privilege to have you. Get in touch all the usual ways, gbviews@gbnews.com. Is it curtains for Rishi Sunak after those by-elections last night? Is there any way back? Could Reform resurge and take that vote away from the Conservatives? Well, I have Ben Habib, the guy who stood in Wellingborough last night, got 13% of the vote, a record by-election result for the Reform Party. He'll be sat in that chair next to me in about half an hour's time. And I'll say to him, actually, could you have done better? And are you handing the keys to number 10 to Sir Keir Starmer? Get in touch the usual ways. Let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, it's your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. The headlines at 4 o'clock.
Lord David Cameron has said the Russian president must be held accountable for the death of jailed Russian politician Alexei Navalny. His comments come as the opposition leader's wife, Yulia Navalny, told the Munich Security Conference earlier the death of her husband will not go unpunished. Other international leaders, including Volodymyr Zelensky, have also laid blame on Russia for Mr. Navalny's death, a claim that's been echoed by the US and the EU, among others. The Foreign Secretary said it's another example of Putin's dreadful regime.
Well, Alex Navalny was an incredibly brave fighter against corruption, and he gave up everything in campaigning for what he believed in. And my heart goes out to his wife and to his family. And we should be clear about what has happened here. Putin's Russia imprisoned him, trumped up charges against him, poisoned him, sent him to an Arctic penal colony, and now he's tragically died. And we should hold Putin accountable.
2 men in East Sussex have been arrested today, one on suspicion of people smuggling and the other for entering the UK illegally. That's after a group of migrants were found earlier in the back of a freezer lorry in New Haven. 6 people have since been taken to hospital, though we understand no fatalities have been reported at this stage. The discovery in the East Sussex port this morning sparked a major emergency response with ambulances, police and border force attending. They are still at that scene, continuing their investigations. The leader of Scottish Labour says the Tories are edging closer to what he's called the far-right crankfest after his party scored a double win in by-elections overnight. Anna Sarwar's comments come after the Tories suffered 2 defeats. Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with a 45.8% of the vote, the second largest swing from Conservatives to Labour in a by-election since the Second World War. And that was just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan also won Kingswood with just under 45% of the vote. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says those results show the country does want change.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party. And last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has admitted that while the circumstances facing his party are challenging, he's insisted that Labour doesn't have a plan.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan, because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
In other news, dentists from overseas could be allowed into the UK faster under new plans to cut red tape and boost appointments. The government's proposing new powers for the regulator to streamline the registration of some dentists who qualified outside the UK. And under current regulations, they're required to pass an exam before they can start working. It's hoped that the new move will speed up recruitment and entice more overseas talent to the NHS. But the British Dental Association has dismissed the plan. They say it wasn't enough to fix what it called a leaky bucket. In royal news, Prince Harry has suggested that the King's cancer diagnosis could lead to a reconciliation within the royal family. Speaking to the Good Morning America programme in the US, the Duke of Sussex said that he loved his father and he was grateful to have spent time with him during a fleeting visit to London last week. But he told ABC News correspondent Will Reeve the conversations he's had with his father about his health will remain private.
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
What's sort of your outlook on his health?
That stays between me and him.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family. Absolutely. Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis.
And to Greece, where couples are racing to registry offices after it became the first country with a Christian Orthodox majority to legalise same-sex marriage. At least one notice appeared in an Athens newspaper today with details of planned nuptials, a step required under Greek law. The historic decision was met with praise from LGBT campaigners. The Prime Minister of Greece called it a milestone for human rights that reflects today's Greece. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen if you're watching on television, or if you're listening on radio, go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. We start the show with the news that 6 migrants have now been taken to hospital after they were found in the back of a lorry at Newhaven Ferryport. And 2 men have been arrested in relation to that. And let's cross now to Newhaven Ferryport and join our South East of England reporter, Ray Addison. Ray, a horrific case developing quickly. What's the latest?
We've heard from local MP for Lewis, Maria Caulfield. She understands that there was an alert on board the Seven Sisters ferry as it was travelling over from Dieppe, that 4-hour journey this morning here to the port of Newhaven. And so when the ferry arrived here at the port, emergency services, police, border force were all here waiting for it. Locals describing the scene as absolutely flooded with emergency services. Of course, that major response in reaction to reports of 6 migrants being found in the back of what's been described as a refrigerator lorry here on the Seven Sisters ferry. Now, of course, mainly freight travels in here to the Newhaven port, and there had been previous concern over migrants. There used to be a migrant camp at the port of Dieppe, and of course, this port only services boats going back and forth to Dieppe, and so that had been a problem before, so they had that issue. However, increasingly that had been cut down on as security had been improved, and so we're being told that there will be a full investigation into exactly the circumstances of how these migrants have got onto the boat here today. We know that 2 men have been arrested, one on suspicion of facilitating illegal entry to the United Kingdom, another on suspicion of entering the country illegally. They're now in custody, and those 6 migrants taken to hospital. We're told that they could be very unwell, and of course there'll be a lot of concern about their health. We spoke earlier to the MP for Lewis, Maria Caulfield. This is what she had to say.
My constituency office is just across the river, really, from the port and from the ferry. We see the ferry routinely come in and out. About 11 o'clock, we could hear helicopters flying over, which is very unusual for here. And we were worried it was one of the fishing boats that had gotten into trouble, and they were maybe doing some search and rescue. But it became apparent it was really related to the port and to the ferry itself. And then we saw emergency services arriving, border force, police, ambulances. And so it became apparent there was something particularly happening at the ferry here. We do know at the moment there's about 6 people who've been taken to hospital. I don't know what condition they are in, but we also know there have been some arrests as well around illegal entry into the country. And the ferry has now left. It left very late compared to when it would normally leave, but there has been helicopters circulating around even after the ferry left, perhaps looking for people who may have escaped or for just kind of surveying the area in general.
Well, Maria Caulfield telling us that she's also seen helicopters circling around the Newhaven port. She said she suspects that there could have been concern that 1 or more migrants may have managed to evade security services here at the port of Newhaven, may then therefore be looking for them. But she's trying to reassure locals of their safety and say that this kind of thing is extremely rare here at Newhaven.
Thank you, Ray. That's an alarming story. Newhaven Ferryport, 6 migrants in the back of a lorry, 2 arrests. And of course, we'll have all the latest on that throughout the show. And now to the fallout from another terrible night for the Tories. And Rishi Sunak is even under more pressure after the government lost 2 crucial by-elections. The Conservatives were defending majorities of 18,000 in Wellingborough and 11,000 in Kingswood, and both seats fell to Labour last night. Well, I'm joined now in our studio by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, there's no dressing this up in a good manner. It was carnage, a record swing since World War II in Wellingborough to previously thought of as safe seats falling to Labour. It was bedlam.
Well, absolutely. It was a terrible night for the Conservatives. There are all sorts of terrible stats. The Conservatives have now lost 8 by-elections in this Parliament. That's more than any since 1994. If the Wellingborough result was replicated across the country, so a swing of 28.4% or whatever it was to Labour, then the Conservatives would be down to just 15 seats. It was obviously a fantastic night for Labour. The only sort of fly in the ointment for Keir Starmer is that turnout was pretty low. It was under 40%. And looking at the breakdown of the results, it seems as though quite a lot of Conservative voters in the 2019 election didn't switch over to Labour, they simply stayed at home. Or, in some cases, they voted for Reform. Reform realised some of those polling wins in those by-elections last night. They leapfrogged the Lib Dems in both constituencies, coming in third place with sort of 13% of the vote. And we can see that Reform are now splitting the Tory vote. All of that said, basically, top line, terrible night for the Tories and really a very, very good night for Labour.
Superb. And to discuss this further, I'm now joined by the Shadow Minister for Creative Industries and Digital, Sir Chris Bryant. Sir Chris, welcome to the show.
Hi there.
Enormous swings to the Labour Party last night, 28.5% in Wellingborough, the biggest swing since World War II. It would now seem, Chris, there's no such thing as a safe Conservative seat. You must be delighted at Labour Party HQ today.
Yes, obviously we're very pleased. I've been helping out in the Kingswood by-election for the last few weeks, and that was one that came completely out of the blue. We suddenly had to go from 0 to 70 in just a couple of weeks. And it was interesting. We spoke to about 21,000 voters in Kingswood. And I disagree with Olivia about one thing. She's certainly right that obviously some Conservative voters stayed at home. Some Conservative voters decided to vote Reform. But I met a lot of people who had switched directly from Conservative to Labour. On one round, I've never had this before in my time. I've been an MP for a long time. I've been campaigning for the Labour Party since the 1980s. I had 8 switchers in one round, one 90-minute round. That's 8 people who'd gone, voted Conservative all their life, including in the Tony Blair years, decided to vote Labour this time. And what was also interesting was that this is a seat in Kingswood, which we last won in 2005. That's 19 years ago. So there were people voting yesterday who were born after we last won that seat in Kingswood. And incidentally, the Kingswood seat has been made more difficult since 2005 for Labour because there have been boundary changes. Also interesting, this might be particularly interesting for GB News, I guess, is that 50% of the seat in Kingswood goes into Jacob Rees-Mogg's parliamentary seat come the general election. And if I were him, I would be very worried.
Talking about GB News presenters, Sir Chris, do you think it'd be a good idea for you to send a bottle of champagne to Nigel Farage? After all, the Reform Party are doing you a great favour, are they not? I have Ben Habib on the show shortly. It seems they're paving the way for Sir Keir Starmer and yourself to get into number 10. Are you going to send a bottle of bubbly to Nigel?
I once bought Nigel, in fact, several times I've bought Nigel pints over the years, as it happens. And I think we've shared a few bottles of wine many years ago when I worked for the BBC, ironically enough. And he was a member of the European Parliament. Funny how things change. Look, I think the big thing that really told for people on the doorstep was the cost of living crisis. And you know that the announcement came out about Rishi's recession yesterday morning, which people had sort of thought might be on the cards. The thing is, people knew it, and they didn't need you to announce it on the news. They knew it in their pockets because people spent less at Christmas. They spent less on Christmas presents. They spent less in their weekly shop because they know that everything is costing more. And that we've seen, people know that they are poorer now than when Rishi Sunak entered Downing Street. So, yes, in one sense, I agree with some of the criticism that Nigel Farage and others have issued to the Conservative Party. They haven't done what they said they would do. Debt is actually up, not down. Inflation is down a bit, but it's still riding at 4%, and that's on top of the 10 and 11% that we had in previous years. People are feeling poorer. The NHS waiting list has got longer. And honestly, it feels like there's a massive row going on in the Conservative Party on a daily basis. 190 Tory MPs have been ministers in this Parliament. 190. And that's 16 housing ministers. No wonder they never get anything done. They just keep on switching around the ministers.
So, Chris, do you think it's fair to say when you look at the turnout last night, we are seeing progressively lower turnout at by-elections, 28% down since 2019, and the none of the above party seemed to be the true winner last night. Is there an argument to be made that Sir Keir Starmer is simply the least bad option? The best option is none of the above?
Listen, if you'd been out knocking with us yesterday afternoon, when it started hammering down with rain from about 2:30 in the afternoon, pretty much all the way through to 10 o'clock, you would have understood why turnout wasn't particularly high. But look, we worked hard, and I'm not complacent at all about the general election. We won this election in Kingswood and in Wellingborough for a whole series of different reasons. One, of course, is that the Tory party is falling apart. They're a rabble. One of them was chucked out of Parliament because he exposed himself to his staff and bullied them, and another decided to leave Parliament because he couldn't bring himself to vote for the Conservative Party anymore, despite being a Conservative MP. So, of course, that's not an ideal situation for the Tories to be able to win. But I just say this, nothing is inevitable in politics. We won, I think, because, first of all, because Keir Starmer has shown that he's changed the Labour Party. It's not the same Labour Party as it was in 2019. Maybe, if he can change the Labour Party, he can change Britain for the good as well. And secondly, because we focused on the issues. You know, the Tory campaign was utterly dire. There was nothing positive in it at all. It was just an endless attack on our candidate for his accent. When have we ever had a parliamentary by-election which is fought just on somebody else's accent? We fought on, let's get more GPs in the constituency, let's get more health service, NHS operations and appointments. Let's get more dentists. Let's make sure people can see an NHS dentist. And of course, it was next door to Bristol where we saw that queue a couple of days ago. But I just think people think it's time for change. I suspect even Nigel Farage agrees with me on that one.
Well, maybe you'll agree so much to Chris Bryant, you'll send him that bottle of fizz after all. If you want, I'll drop you the address to GB News HQ. Thank you very much for joining us, Sir Chris Bryant, and enjoy your victories. Thanks a lot, mate.
Thank you. Cheers.
OK, moving on, it's time for the Great British Giveaway, and you really could be our next winner with £18,000 in cash from us. You fancy a chance to win it? Well, here's all the details that you need to enter.
Time is ticking on your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash. That's like having an extra £1,500 each month for the next year. Listen to the moment we told Phil from West Yorkshire he'd won our last Great British Giveaway.
Hello? Phil, I've got some really good news for you. You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
You're joking. That's brilliant news.
For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Great stuff. Get stuck in. Now, Prince Harry has talked about his meeting with the King following his cancer diagnosis last week. And after saying that sickness brings families together, could a royal reconciliation finally be on the cards, or is it just yet more navel-gazing PR? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:24. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I'll tell you why someone has threatened to firebomb a cafe in Scotland. It's an extraordinary story. But before that, Vladimir Putin's biggest critic has died in prison. Alexei Navalny fell ill after a walk, almost immediately lost consciousness and died soon afterwards, according to prison authorities. The president of the European Council said the European Union holds Russia solely responsible for his death, and the president of Latvia said Mr. Navalny had been brutally murdered by the Kremlin. Well, to discuss this further, I'm now joined by Stepan Stepanenko, who's a commentator on Russian politics. Welcome to the show, Stepan. World leaders queuing up to firmly point the finger of blame at Vladimir Putin. What's the truth?
Hello, Martin. Well, first of all, I think I want to offer my condolences to the family of Navalny. It's a difficult time for them. The most important thing for us to remember is that no matter what the cause of death is said to be, he was killed in a Russian prison where he was held on trumped-up charges and held for 2 years in solitary confinement illegally. So he died because of Putin and his actions, no matter what the cause of death is. The other thing to remember is that we are going to have elections in Russia very soon, and Putin is clearing his field. Now, it's not to say that Navalny was going to run, let alone win, because he's in prison. But Putin not only thought that he was enough of a threat, but also he still lives by this thief's code of the roaring 90s of Russia, where you have to be perceived as a strong man, and a strong man cannot have opposition, especially somebody as lowly as Navalny. But we also have to remember that, especially for Britain, we have a British national, Vladimir Karamurza, now in prison in Russia, and it is entirely possible that he may be next.
And is there any chance this chilling message gets sent out here, Stepan? Is there any chance that anybody can possibly step up and be a legitimate political opponent to Vladimir Putin. They just always seem to end up dead.
Well, back in the summer of 21, Biden did warn that there's going to be severe consequences for Russia if Navalny dies. Navalny has been killed. It is time for Biden to step up, something that perhaps they didn't do enough in February 22. It is their chance again. Now, one of the ways to do it is to use the sanctions that America is putting on Russia, increase those sanctions, but let people in Russia, oligarchs in Russia, come out of them if they support Ukraine financially, they state it, and sway the opinion of those in Russia who have the money, who have the ability to topple Putin through a possible release of assets and release from sanctions.
OK, thank you very much for that summary on the death of Alexei Navalny. And that was Stepan Stepanenko, a commentator on Russian politics. Now, Prince Harry just can't help himself, can he? He's at it again, and he suggested that the King's illness could lead to a reconciliation with his father. I'm joined now by the royal biographer Angela Levin to go over this. Angela, welcome to the show once again.
Thank you.
On this topic, Harry has finally broken his silence, as you do, on primetime American television.
Yes, I mean, we can now tell that he actually popped over to see his father so that he could do this interview, make some money and talk about Invictus Games. You can see that there's a pattern there, and that's what he's fallen for. It is so irritating, though, however. I mean, he behaves like a teenager. And when he says, you know, what's he worried about his father? Oh, I love my family. You know, it's all very flippant. It's not very caring. It's all superficial. And when he says, you know, how is your father? And he says in reply, it's between him and me. Now, one, you can bet a lot of money that King Charles didn't give him any information whatsoever, because you know that he can't be trusted. And the other thing, he said the same thing about the Queen, the late Queen, when he said, oh, she knows that I'm the only person she can talk about certain things. Now, both of those is to sort of inflate his own personality and how important it is. But in fact is that the royal family are going on without him. They can't think too much about him because he drones on about what's not fair and all that. So they just move on.
And Angela, there is one crumb of comfort, though. It looks like he may apply for dual citizenship, which means he could stay in America, do us all a favour.
Yes, he could do that, but he's open about that. He's given it a thought. But however, next week he's in Washington hearing about whether his immigration records can be released over his drug use. So he might not actually be able to do that. We don't know whether he has said anything about them or he hasn't, or what their sort of line is that he could come in or not. So what he does say at the end, which is very disturbing, he says, the mission continues. Now, what is this mission? I know there's a huge mission to get rid of most of the newspapers there are in this country, but I think he's got a different mission, and that is to have his own private royal family and have nothing to do with the royal family, which we saw yesterday when he, with a new website went up, and also they've changed the children's names to Sussex. So I think that's what he means by his mission, and it's just scary and unpleasant.
OK, well, certainly mission impossible for him to keep his trap shut. Angela Levin, thank you very much for joining us on the show as ever. And there's loads more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. And I have an extraordinary story from Edinburgh where there have been threats to firebomb a cafe at the city's famous castle. And right after this, we've got Ben Habib in the hot seat in the studio. But first is your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. Just gone 4:30, our top story this afternoon. Boris Johnson has said the death of Alexei Navalny plunges Russia into new depths of depravity, and he's accused Vladimir Putin of putting him to death. His comments come as the opposition leader's wife, Yulia Navalny, told the Munich Security Conference earlier the death of her husband will not go unpunished. Other international leaders, including Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, have also laid blame on Russia for Mr Navalny's death, a claim that's been echoed by the US and the EU. Here in the UK, the Foreign Secretary, Lord David Cameron, says it's another example of Putin's dreadful regime. 2 men have been arrested after a group of migrants were found in the back of a freezer lorry in East Sussex. 6 people have since been taken to hospital. We understand no deaths have been reported at this stage. That discovery at Newhaven Port this morning sparked a major emergency response, with Border Force still at the scene, continuing their investigations. 2 damaging by-election defeats have piled pressure on the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, but Labour says the double win is evidence that it's a government in waiting. Overnight, Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with just over 45% of the vote. That's the second largest by-election swing from Conservative to Labour since the Second World War. And that result came just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan also won in Kingswood with just under 45%. In other news, a woman has been jailed for 7 years for assisting someone to carry out female genital mutilation on a 3-year-old child. 40-year-old Amin Noor handed over a British girl to a non-UK citizen during a trip to Kenya in 2006. We understand she is the first person to be convicted of taking someone to another country for FGM, which the judge in that case described as a truly horrific and abhorrent crime. Prince Harry has suggested that the King's cancer diagnosis could lead to a reconciliation in the royal family. Speaking to the Good Morning America programme in the US, the Duke of Sussex said he was grateful to spend time with his father during a fleeting visit to London last week, but he says the conversations about the King's health will remain private. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. Now, Reform UK leader Richard Tice says his party is on the up. They finished 3rd in yesterday's 2 by-elections, but is that as good as it's going to get for them? Well, after this, I'll have Ben Habib. He's right next to me now in the studio, the deputy leader of the Reform Party, in the hot seat. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yeah.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 4:37. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later in the show, I'll cover a very worrying story because apparently nightclubs are closing because young people are drinking less. What's wrong with them? But before that, whilst yesterday was undoubtedly calamitous for the Conservative Party, it was a very strong night for Reform UK, who came a clear third in both Wellingborough and in Kingswood. The party got over 10% of the vote in both constituencies, while support for the Liberal Democrats sank like a stone as they lost both of their deposits in those seats. The Ed Davey factor is rubbing off. Well, joining me now in the studio is the man who stood for Reform UK in Wellingborough, Ben Habib, who, of course, is the deputy leader of the party. Welcome to the show. So, in the by-election last night, you got 13% of the vote, Reform UK's best ever by-election result. How do you feel?
Can I just first say what a delight it is to be back on GB News? You know, when you're fighting an election, you're kept in purdah. So this is my coming out. I was on with Patrick Christie's and a bit in the counting room, but this is properly in the studio, having a proper interview, and it's wonderful to be here.
Well, you're welcome. Now, get on with it. How's it feel?
It feels great. You know, when you enter a race, you want to win it, don't you? You absolutely swing the bat in order to win. We obviously didn't win. But the third place that we got was the best ever election result of any description that the Reform UK has had. And you remember, just a few months ago in Tamworth, we got just over 5%. A few months later, we're getting 13%, nearly 3 times as much. So a dramatic shift in the way people perceive reform. And of course, every time we make a bridgehead, we move on to something else. All the noise around our performance yesterday, both Rupert Lowe's performance in Kingswood and mine in Wellingborough, advances the party, advances the cause, establishes the principle, which is critical, Martin, that people realise there is a third party for which they can vote. You know, the two main legacy parties, I call them, the legacy parties, the old parties, the parties that have delivered the United Kingdom to the precipice of disaster, they seem to think that the baton should be just exchanged seamlessly between them. But no, there is a new force in party politics, and it is reform.
I've got to put it to you, 13% is a respectable turnout, but it's not as good as UKIP did in the same seat in 2015. They got 19%. We've got a Tory party on its knees. They were there ripe for the taking. Is 13% really good enough? Is it cutting through enough at this stage, Ben?
Martin, I came from a standing start on the 3rd of January when I put my hat in the ring. The odds were 66 to 1 when I put my hat in the ring. By the time it came round to the actual by-election, the voting day, I was 7 to 1. It was a dramatic campaign. We went from not being recognised or known in Wellingborough to actually on the last day, we went around in the open-top bus and people were waving at me and saying, "Hello, Ben, how are you today?" You know, a huge change. And I'm going to stand there again in Wellingborough in the general election. And I'm not going to turn my back on the good people of Wellingborough. I'm going to go and visit and I'm going to develop our case between now and, whenever the general election is, and make sure that we've got an agenda for the people of Wellingborough, for the country, or, of course, a lot of the things that Wellingborough suffers from born out of bad national policy. But we need to reveal how it is that bad national policy is having a material adverse effect on the people in Wellingborough. And I'm going to do that between now and the general election. And I tell you what, Jen Kitchen and Helen Harrison, if Helen Harrison stands for the Conservatives again, they need to watch out. Because reform is not stopping here. As I said, this is a bridgehead. We're going to use it to come forward again.
A lot of people, of course, as sure as night follows day, are saying that reform is simply splitting the vote and letting the Labour Party in. Is that true? Is there anything in that? Is there a feeling that what you're doing by taking away the Conservative votes, as they would see it, is handing the keys to number 10 to Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, it seems to me that the Conservative Party views anyone that takes a vote as splitting the vote. The biggest split of vote that the Conservatives have got from the Labour Party. You know, they take Conservative votes, don't they? I mean, it's an extraordinary sense of self-entitlement that they think that these are their votes that we've taken. These are votes that have been cast by the British electorate in favour of Reform UK because they like what we stand for. They voted in favour of our party. The Conservative Party has no right to these votes. The Labour Party has no rights to these votes. You get lent them at each election by the British people. And we are not a party that's going to be here today, gone tomorrow. There'll be no deals with the Conservative Party. We are here for the long term. We provide a democratic alternative to the other parties. And we're not splitting anyone's vote. These are our votes. If the Conservatives get thumped in the next election, which is what everyone is predicting, it's because they failed the country. It's because they failed to perform, because they've brought the country to the precipice of peril. They deserve to be thumped for doing that.
Did you find on the doorsteps a phenomenon that reflected a very low turnout across the two by-elections, apathy, or even anger? Anne Widdecombe was on the GB News election night special last night. She said that when she came to help campaign with you, a lot of people were like saying, "Oh, just clear off. I'm not interested in talking to any of you." They're so disenfranchised, disengaged, disappointed with British politicians that they're staying at home, apathy being the enemy.
I'd say, I think it's not really apathy. I think it's great disillusionment. A lack of trust in the institutions which govern the country because of how damaging the effects of governance has been on their lives over the last few years. And I have, you know, tremendous sympathy for them. The reason I'm in politics is because of the damage that's been done to the country. If we were being run by competent people with the British national interest and the British people's interest at heart, I wouldn't be in politics. And I think the optimistic side of this is that it is now getting established, that it isn't simply a choice between the awful Conservatives on one side of the coin to the awful Labour Party on the other side of the same coin. You know, they're sort of versions of each other, aren't they? When you look at the Conservative track record in office, national debt at a post-World War II high, taxation at a post-World War II high, 6 million people surviving on universal credit to a greater or less extent, the country in recession, rampant immigration. These are all symptoms of having been governed under socialist policies for a protracted period. And yet it's a Conservative government. And so I think Reform UK offers a genuine third party to those voters who are disillusioned, who are upset with the way that the country's been governed.
One final question. You're a Conservative, Richard Tyson's a Conservative, Nigel Farage is Conservative at heart. Is this chess moves ahead about watching the Tories implode at the General and then rebuilding the Conservative Party, maybe with you guys getting involved in the Tory party? Is that what this is about, or is Reform a general standalone party to take the fight to them?
It is a standalone party, no deals with the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party has failed. If there are any genuine Conservatives in the Conservative Party, what I say to them is, you're in the wrong party. Join Reform UK. Not that this is an invitation to any Tory MPs. If they wish to join Reform UK, they can get in line with everyone else.
Superb. Ben Habib, thank you very much for joining us. A rousing speech, and well done on your turnout last night. Good stuff.
Thank you.
And please become a regular on the show. And now you're back on GB News. How's it feel?
Yeah, it's wonderful. As I said, it's like coming back to a family, if I may say that.
Good stuff. OK, thank you very much, Ben Habib. Now, police are investigating violent threats against an Edinburgh Castle cafe, of all things, because Scottish nationalists say its name is offensive to Scots. You couldn't make it up. They're getting angry about a cafe. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Antony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals, we've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying, we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Round year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:50. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now at 5 o'clock, I'll speak to a Tory MP after yet another nightmare night for the government. Now, police are investigating violent threats against an Edinburgh Castle cafe because Scottish nationalists say its name is offensive to Scots. The Redcoats Cafe is named after British Redcoats soldiers, and one post on X, or Twitter as it was called, said the cafe deserves to be firebombed. Yes, a cafe deserves to be firebombed. And let's cross now to Edinburgh and speak to freelance columnist Alistair Stewart. Alistair, really, it's a cafe. It's got a name that they don't like. Is it really worth bombing on that basis?
No, I don't think it is, and I can't believe I actually have to say that on television. It would be a laughable story if not for the seriousness of what's going on in Scotland. The timing is monstrously unfortunate given that a recession has just been declared, but nevertheless this is a talking point, particularly online, for some independence supporters. It should be stressed that the SNP themselves, bar one or two disgruntled backbenchers, have largely distanced themselves from this story, but nevertheless it is fodder for an angry group online online who are trying to make a story where, truth be told, there is none. This cafe has been in operation for at least 30 years and had this name. There is no story but stuff that they're trying to conjure up and make things difficult for pro-unionist parties. They're making something that is sitting next to Edinburgh Castle, is largely harmless and there for families, innately political. It's a desperate move.
Yeah, 30 years of trouble-free trading. Now they're getting so many negative reviews, they've had to close down their online review system. But just trying to help us make some fragment of sense of this story, Alistair, why are people so angry about the Redcoats? What did they do in Scotland in the past that's so angered nationalists now?
That is a very complicated question, but I'll keep it as simple as I can. That there is certainly at the moment a perceived sense of grievance that Englishness and the Union were forced on Scotland, and there are certain representations of that that are more striking than others. Redcoats is one of them. Winston Churchill is another. Anything associated with the British Empire is yet another. The list will go on and on and on. When it comes to a cafe that's in Edinburgh and at Edinburgh Castle, you must remember that it is a booming tourist destination for people and therefore an easy target. The thing that most people forget, particularly in the British Isles, is history is conflated and very selectable. You can have any argument about anything at any time because it's all over the place. The issue that we have here with Scottish independence is you're trying to take a very contemporary debate and just apply it to different vignettes in history. And as you said there, it's a cafe that's been in operation for 30 years. It just happens to have a disagreeable name. And unfortunately, that has turned into a threat of very serious violence that's been investigated by Police Scotland.
And Alistair, this is dating back to grievances from the 18th century, but fast forward to the modern day. What's the momentum like for independence in Scotland north of the border? We're seeing the Labour Party doing tremendously well down here in by-elections, but the SNP, are they back on a resurgent move or not?
No, they're in the back foot. We've just passed the anniversary of Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, and her successor, Humza Yousaf, has never regained her popularity or recognition across the board. Independence, by and large, is something that pro-independence supporters talk about, but not something that's a serious policy debate at the moment. I think you'd be seriously hard-pressed to find anyone in Scotland at the moment that would put that at the top of the list of concerns that they have when the NHS is in severe difficulty. We are now in a recession, and that there's a lot of policy travails which have been going on for years, which continue to be going forward. Independence was once treated as the solution to all of these, but you'd be struggling to find even many SNP MSPs, Member of Parliament, or supporters that think right now is the time for that to solve everything that's going on. There's a catalogue of struggling issues, and a Redcoat cafe somehow is making it to the talking point of a coterie of troublemakers.
Yeah, Alistair Stewart, thank you for joining us on GB News. I think you've absolutely nailed it on the head. Of all the things to get angry about, there's education, there's the NHS, there's drug addiction, there's crime, there's poverty, there's dentistry. There's a list of stuff as long as your arms in Scotland to get angry about, and yet they're angry about a cafe. Now, Rishi Sunak had a nightmare night last night in 2 by-elections. Labour won in Wellingborough and also Kingswood. We'll have a full roundup after this. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, I'm Alex Bergill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. We do have some pretty wet weather on the cards as we go through later tomorrow, but for the time being, it's a largely dry picture. That's because we do have a weak ridge of higher pressure across the UK, and it's this that's quietened things down a little bit. That being said, there are still some showery outbreaks of rain around at the moment, and a few of these will continue as we go through the end of the day. Some clear skies through the start of the night, particularly towards the east, before a swathe of thicker cloud pushes its way into western parts, and this is likely to bring some drizzly outbreaks of rain, particularly in the west. For most, though, staying relatively mild, perhaps a little fresher than some recent nights, but temperatures in many places holding up in high single figures, if not double digits. The best chance of any sunshine tomorrow will be across parts of Scotland and in the east first thing. However, it is going to turn increasingly cloudy as we go through the day, and so sunshine will become a bit more limited. A few spots of drizzly rain for a time before this swathe of wetter weather feeds in from the west, and this could cause some localised flooding in a few places. Again, a mild day, temperatures well above average for the time of year, highs of around 15 or 16 Celsius. A bit of uncertainty as to how quickly that rain pushes eastwards and clears away, but it is likely to push away as we go through Sunday morning, but could be a wet start, at least in the southeast. Otherwise, Sunday does look like a largely dry day, just a few spots of rain around before something more unsettled comes next week. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has made her much-anticipated appearance before the Scottish COVID inquiry today. It comes after allegations emerged that she deleted key pandemic WhatsApp messages, used the pandemic to push her own political agenda. But let's just cast our mind back, shall we, to August 2021, when Sturgeon was asked if she'd hand over all her WhatsApps to the inquiry. Here we go.
I think if you understand statutory public inquiries, you would know that even if I wasn't prepared to give that assurance, which for the avoidance of doubt I am, then I wouldn't have the ability. This will be a judge-led statutory public inquiry.
Which, for the avoidance of doubt, I am. OK. Well, you weren't, were you? But fast forward to today, and she was much less forthcoming.
WhatsApp messages between yourself and Mr Youssef and Ms Lloyd were produced by you. Where did you get them?
They were provided to me through the Scottish Government.
But did you delete them?
Yes.
Did you consider yourself, against that background and your considerable ministerial experience, to be precisely the right First Minister for the job?
No, that's not how I would have thought of it at all. There's a large part of me wishes that I hadn't been.
All right, then. I'm joined now by Tory MP Lee Anderson. Lee, are those just crocodile tears?
Well, it looks like crocodile tears to me, Patrick. I mean, first we had the missing camper van. Nobody knows where that is. Now we've got this nonsense. We've got these burner phones, dodgy £5 phones from wherever they bought them from, WhatsApp messages going missing. It all looks a little bit dodgy to me. I mean, she's bleating on there, she's crying on screen. This is not cutting no ice. You know, it's crocodile tears. It makes you wonder what the SNPs are all about, Patrick. It looks... I mean, the people that have burner phones, let's be clear, people that have these dodgy phones where you can't trace them and disappearing WhatsApp messages, these are normally criminals, these are drug dealers, and you know what, these SNPs are no better than criminals.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 5 p.m. and a very happy Friday afternoon to you. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. Today I look back on yet another miserable night for Rishi Sunak after the Tories lost 2 more crucial by-elections ahead of a general election. Of course, one of the Prime Minister's 5 pledges is to stop the boats, but now the security services are worried that extremists are crossing the channel. You don't say. And Prince Harry just can't keep his mouth shut, can he? This time he's been yapping away to American television, prime time, about the King's illness, as you do. But the good news is he may take up American citizenship, so he might stay in California. And that's all coming up in your next hour. welcome to the show and thank you for your company. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to have you on board. Get in touch all the usual ways. Email me, please, gbviews@gbnews.com. Is there any way back for Rishi after last night? Is this a bellwether of things to come? Are Reform handing the keys to number 10 to Sir Keir Starmer? Or do the Tories deserve all they get? Please let me know your thoughts. We want to keep this conversation fast and spicy. Get involved. This is your show just as much as mine. But first, it's your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much and good evening from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 5 o'clock and leading the news this hour, Boris Johnson has said that the death of Alexei Navalny plunges Russia into new depths of depravity as he accused Vladimir Putin of putting him to death. His comments come as the opposition leader's wife, Yulia Navalny, told the Munich Security Conference the death of her husband will not go unpunished. Other international leaders, including Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine, have also laid blame on Russia for Mr Navalny's death, a claim that's been echoed by the US and the EU. Here in the UK, the Foreign Secretary, Lord David Cameron, says it's another example of Putin's dreadful regime.
Well, Alex Navalny was an incredibly brave fighter against corruption, and he gave up everything in campaigning for what he believed in. And my heart goes out to his wife and to his family. And we should be clear about what has happened here. Putin's Russia imprisoned him, trumped up charges against him, poisoned him, sent him to an Arctic penal colony, and now he's tragically died. And we should hold Putin accountable.
In other news, we've learned today that 2 men have been arrested, one on suspicion of people smuggling and the other for entering the UK illegally. That's after a group of migrants were found in the back of a freezer lorry in Newhaven. 6 people have since been taken to hospital. We understand that no deaths have been reported so far. The discovery at the East Sussex port this morning sparked a major emergency response, with ambulances and police rushing to the scene. Border Force are still there, continuing their investigations. MP for Lewis, Maria Caulfield, whose constituency office is in Newhaven, told GB News that people smugglers are looking for other ways into the UK.
There have been problems in the past before the small boats were crossing where migrants used to try and board the ferry. If you were kind of boarding in Dieppe, you would see the authorities are extremely strict there. They check all the lorries, they check the ferry itself. I've personally seen people try and board the ferry in the past and they've never been successful. So we are worried that this has happened, but it shows because the government is cracking down on the small boats, these people smugglers are looking for alternative routes such as the Newhaven ferry to try and get people into the country.
2 damaging by-election defeats have piled pressure on the Prime Minister overnight. Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with just over 45% of the vote. That's the second largest by-election swing from Conservative to Labour since the Second World War. And that result came just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan also won in Kingswood with just under 45% of the vote. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the double win is evidence that his party is a government in waiting, he says. But Rishi Sunak has insisted they don't have a plan.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
A woman has been jailed today for 7 years for assisting someone to carry out female genital mutilation on a 3-year-old child. 40-year-old Amin Noor handed over a British girl to a non-British citizen during a trip to Kenya in 2006. She was sentenced at the Old Bailey in London earlier, and it's the first conviction for taking someone to another country for FGM. The judge in that case described it as a truly horrific and abhorrent crime. Dentists from overseas could be allowed into the UK faster under plans to cut red tape and boost appointments. The government's proposing new powers for the regulator to streamline the registration of dentists who qualified outside the UK. Under current regulations, they're required to pass an exam before they can start working. It's hoped that the new move will speed up recruitment and entice more overseas talent to the NHS. But the British Dental Association has dismissed the plan. They say it wasn't enough to fix what they've called a leaky bucket. In royal news, Prince Harry has suggested the King's cancer diagnosis could lead to a reconciliation in his family. Speaking to the Good Morning America programme in the US, the Duke of Sussex said that he loved his father and he was grateful to have spent time with him during a fleeting visit to London last week. But he told ABC News correspondent Will Reeve the conversations he's had with his father about his health will remain private.
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
What's sort of your outlook on his health?
That stays between me and him.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family.
Absolutely.
Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis.
Those are the headlines. To keep across all the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. Now we start with the fallout from another terrible night for the Tories. Turned out to be a nightmare on Downing Street. Rishi Sunak is now under even more pressure after the government lost those two crucial by-elections. The Conservatives were defending majorities of 18,000 in Wellingborough and 11,000 in Kingswood, and both seats fell to Labour last night. Well, I'm joined in the studio once again by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, we've tried to window dress this or put a bit of sugar on top, but there's no sweetening the message to Rishi Sunak, is there? He says we've got a plan and we must stick to it, but the electorate just don't seem to agree.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it was a really catastrophic night for the Conservatives. This is just the latest in a whole string of by-election defeats over the last 8 months or so. And we are seeing really, really big Conservative majorities being turned over. It does feel like there's no such thing as a Conservative safe seat anymore. I think what lots of Conservatives are finding particularly depressing about these specific by-elections is it felt, even before the by-elections took place, as though the Conservatives had basically given up. They weren't really even campaigning in these seats. And in Wellingborough, the candidate was the girlfriend of Peter Bone, who resigned under a very big cloud in the end of the last Parliament. So it's all just a pretty bad look for the Conservatives. I mean, they would argue that Kingswood specifically is going to be broken up at the next election. Wellingborough is going to be a different seat altogether. So perhaps it wasn't worth putting a lot of campaigning effort into those seats. But the optics aren't good at all. And I think the other problem is, I mean, this is really a problem for both parties, and I know you've talked about this earlier in the show, is that there is such a sense of apathy on the streets. Turnout was really, really low. Turnout was below 40% in both of those seats. And Keir Starmer talks about people being desperate for change. Well, in a way they are. They're desperate to get rid of the Conservatives, but they're not flocking towards Labour with a sort of wave of enthusiasm. This is not anything like 1997. People are voting Labour because it seems like the better of two options, or actually they're just not voting at all. Conservative voters are staying at home. Few of them are going out to vote for reform, and I think that's a really interesting conversation, because obviously we've seen all of these pretty good polls for reform recently, and last night some of those good polling results were realised in these by-election, almost 13% in Wellingborough. It's not too bad. But are those just protest votes? Are those reform voters actually going to vote reform at the next election? And what do reform really want?
Well, that's a question I put to Ben Habib earlier. We had him in the studio, because a lot of people, of course, will continually say, as sure as night follows day, Olivia, oh, you're splitting the vote, as if that vote should be Conservative and they're taking it away. But they're also paving the way for Labour victories if they are splitting that vote. So I put it to him, are you splitting the vote? Are you handing the keys to number 10 to Sir Keir Starmer? He said, we don't care about that. We just want to wipe out the Tories. And so the bigger question is, Nigel Farage today is saying again, the majority of Conservative Party members would vote for me to be the leader over Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. What do you think's going on? Like, thinking 2 or 3 chess moves ahead. Is this about obliterating the Tories and they don't care if Sir Keir Starmer gets in? Because then the Conservative Party might actually be Conservative and it might involve Nigel Farage and Richard Tice and Ben Habib. Or I put that to Ben. He said, no deals. We're not doing that. But Nigel himself keeps saying it.
I think that's a really, really interesting question. What is Reform's sort of end goal here? Do they actually want to be picking up seats up and down the country? I'm not sure. Just having a look at their manifesto, quite a lot of their policies are sort of patently unrealistic. I mean, we might like the sound of them, but something like raising the income tax threshold from 12,500 to 20,000, in practice, that would be very, very difficult indeed. What do they want to do? Do they want to come a close second up and down the country? And then would they make a deal with the Conservatives? Or is the end goal, and this is what I think might be the case, Reform wouldn't admit it, but I think it might be that what they're hoping is that they split the Tory vote at the next election, and then when the Tories rise from the ashes, as they will do inevitably in the end, however bad the defeat, the Tories will rise again, they will take into account those right-wingers and they will start to tack to the right. They will take on someone like perhaps Kemi Badenoch as their leader. Is it that Reform want to get seats, or do they just want some sort of right-wing ideas incorporated into the Conservative Party? I don't even think they're looking for any sort of official coalition. They just want to make sure that right-wingers are still being listened to, and perhaps that in itself is a noble goal.
Olivia Utley, superb stuff. And let's take that further now, because I'm joined by the Conservative MP for Buckingham, Greg Smith. Greg, welcome to the show. Not the best of days for the Conservative Party, but thanks for coming out to chat to us. So we're just saying that no such thing as a safe Conservative seat, it would seem, anymore. A record number of by-elections lost by the Conservative Party in this term of Parliament since the 1960s. In fact, your own seat, Greg, would traditionally be considered very safe with a majority of 20,411, but we've seen massive overturns of majorities now. Is there any such thing, Greg, now as a safe seat, or we are facing this very volatile, unpredictable future electorally?
Look, good afternoon. I've never considered my own seat safe. Yes, I've got a very good majority right now, but there were a lot of Labour MPs in the Red Wall who considered themselves safe as houses in the 2019 general election and woke up to big surprises on the morning after that general election. So my attitude has always been, don't talk about safe and marginal and unwinnable and all of that nonsense. Just get on and campaign and meet people, as I've been doing all day on the doorsteps, and try and earn the trust of every single vote that you get. That has been my way of doing politics, and it will continue to be the approach I take. I think we have seen a big change in electoral politics in this country, away from maybe the tribal voting we saw in the past, where people voted the same way forever. And the electorate is a lot more volatile in the way they're willing to go from one party to another from different types of elections. And the best example I can give you of that actually is my own party in 2019, where we went from a pretty dismal 9% national vote share in the last European Parliament elections to be held in this country before we finally left the European Union, to an 80-seat majority in the general election just 6 months later. So that proves to you how much electoral patterns can shift. What we need to do now as a party is to pull together and to ensure that we have got a message and a plan for the future, not just standing on what we have or haven't done in the last 14 years, but a clear offer to the country that people want to get behind whenever this election comes this year, be it May, be it the summer, be it the autumn.
But Greg, the reason that you got an 80-seat majority, the reason that you went from being wiped out to a huge majority is because people like me stood and got elected as Brexit Party MEPs, and we went out there and we made sure that you lot did your job, because you almost threw it away. Theresa May almost sold us out to European unions, and then history got us to the point where you got an 80-seat majority. And now, on the doorsteps of these by-elections, we hear continually there's a belief now that no matter who the politicians are out there, you don't seem to listen to the public. There's a sense that the 80-seat majority has been thrown away. Was Brexit really done? Are borders being controlled? And people aren't necessarily saying things are going to get any much better under Sir Keir Starmer. But are we at that situation now, Greg, that 13-year itch where people are just so fed up, they just want to change?
History teaches us that sometimes the change message can be more powerful than any retail offer, if you like. But to this listening point, I've been out on the doorsteps all day today listening to what people have got to say. I've been campaigning all week, actually. Parliament's in recess, and I've spent the vast majority of my week out about in my constituency. And the big messages that I'm getting, that I'm certainly taking back to Westminster, is nothing that took me by surprise. It's nothing I haven't been saying for months and months already, is around the borders point. They want to see the small boats stopped. They want to see illegal immigration into this country ended. And they are very frustrated about the amount of tax they're paying. Now, the people accept that the pandemic happened. We borrowed 400 billion quid. That needs paying back. That is going to have an impact. That everybody felt secure through the pandemic because of that money, because they were getting furlough or the loans or the grants to businesses or whatever it might be. And they accept that has to be paid back. But I've been arguing for lower taxes, well, my whole life, basically. Certainly since I've been a member of Parliament, I've been pushing for the 40% threshold to be put up because too many people are being dragged into that higher rate of tax. And that is being echoed by what people have told me today on the doorsteps in Buckinghamshire. So it's a message I will go back with, rocket boosters under it when we go back to the House of Commons next Monday.
OK, Greg, and I'd like to see you in the studio next week. But I've got Olivia Utley here, our political correspondent. She has a question for you.
Well, I just wanted to pick up on that point that you were making there, Greg, about taxes, because it sounds as though Jeremy Hunt is actually shying away from serious tax cuts in the next budget. I've spoken to a lot of sort of conservative-minded people who now feel that the only reason why they would possibly even consider voting Conservative in the middle of this immigration crisis, worklessness crisis, etc., which, frankly, it doesn't feel as though the Conservatives have really done much to tackle. The only reason why they might vote Conservative is to get lower taxes. Do you believe, I know it's what you want, do you think that your party is listening to you? Do you think that your Chancellor is listening to you? Is it going to happen?
Well, we were told weeks out from the autumn statement until the mood changed that tax cuts were going to be impossible in that. And we got the what I branded a good start in the national insurance reduction. Nowhere near enough in one hit, but it was a good start. Now, the Chancellor has been talking the language of further tax cuts ever since the autumn statement. I believe he wants to deliver lower taxes. I believe he is a low-tax Conservative, as the Prime Minister is. But we've got to prove it now. The spring budget is our last chance to prove it. And if we don't deliver a meaningful tax cut that puts seriously, bigger amounts of people's own money back in their own pockets on each month's paycheck, I think we are going to have a problem. And you always get the mood music before a budget where expectation management is the catchphrase. But I think at the end of the day, when he stands up at that dispatch box on budget day in a couple of weeks' time, he needs to land something where people seriously feel better off and more of their own money is going into their bank rather than to the taxman.
Superb. Thank you very much, Greg Smith, MP for Buckingham. And, of course, Olivia Utley, thank you very much for that great question. And, yeah, you're right, spring is in the air. That budget is coming, and it's time to put a spring rabbit out of the hat. Now, before last night, Labour hadn't won in Kingswood since 2005, and their last win in Wellingborough was back in 2001.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party. And last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go.
Now, what would you do with an extra £1,500 each month for an entire year? Well, you could win that in our Great British Giveaway, as £18,000 in cold, hard cash is up for grabs. And here's how you could win all of that wonga.
Still time to turn 2024 into 2020 more with your chance to win £18,000 in cash to spend however you like. You really could be the next big winner of our Great British Giveaway. Phil from West Yorkshire won our last one. Listen to his reaction when we gave him the news.
I never won a penny in my life.
Well, congratulations, you've won £10,000.
Oh my God, wow.
But hurry, for another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Now, Prince Harry has talked about his meeting with the King following his cancer diagnosis last week. And being Harry, of course, he did it on primetime television in America. And after saying that sickness brings families together, could a royal reconciliation be on the cards? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you,
sure,
and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, one year you spend £100 and the next year you spend maybe £101 as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever
right.
it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:25. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I get reaction to the news that security services are worried that extremists are crossing the channel in small boats. They've finally woken up to that danger. But before that, Prince Harry simply cannot help himself, can he? He suggested the King's illness could lead to a reconciliation with his father. Well, I'm now joined by the writer Cara Kennedy. Cara, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. So, Harry has broken his silence on a touching, intimate, private topic on primetime television in America.
Yeah, I think Americans have had a taste today of how low Harry will really go. People I've spoken to here are now under the impression that Harry didn't go and jump on a plane to see his father, the king, to be the kind and considerate son, but instead so he could make sure that he has some more fodder for the interviews that he knew were coming, and that he could get himself a spot on Good Morning America after a pretty quiet few weeks of media for the couple.
Cara, that's a fascinating insight, because we like to believe over here that the Americans lap all this up. They think, oh, wow, he's a royal, I'll just believe everything he says, whereas we're the grizzled cynics. So are you saying that the same cynicism is now creeping over to America, your side of the pond?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it took a few years. We definitely clicked on to the manipulation before, but after such an aggressive PR campaign over the past few years, Americans are definitely waking up to the behavior and the manipulation, and especially over the past week or so, there's been such an aggressive PR campaign. On Wednesday, there was an official statement, a furious statement put out by the couple saying that they will not be broken. And they've also launched a new website in the past week, and Meghan's announced that she's hosted a new podcast series. So this is just the latest in a string of kind of PR attacks by the couple.
How on earth can royals with endless finances and a privileged lifestyle, there they are, skiing away, living the life of Riley, how on earth, Cara, can they claim to be broken?
Yeah, it's kind of insane now, and it's getting to the point where, like I said, everybody is coming to the same realization that these people are just, they go in and out of periods of times where they need a lot of attention, and then they kind of go quiet for a few months, but then you realize that when they come back, what they've been doing for a few months is kind of scheming and saying, how can we make more money, and how can we kind of monetize this?
Well, Cara, you better get used to them, because it seems that Harry is dabbling with the concept of dual nationality, which means you could stay stateside full time.
Yeah, he said today that although it's not the first thing that he's going to go out and do, that he is considering getting an American citizenship, which I'm sure a lot of people won't be happy with. But I guess it's probably better that he's kept away from the UK and from the royal family, and at least there's a bit of distance between the two.
Well, Cara Kennedy, thank you for joining us, and I think a lot of people this side of the pond will be quite happy for Harry to take citizenship, and he's a gift that we will pass over to you in America. Cara Kennedy, thank you very much for joining us on GB News. Now I've got time for a few of your emails, but asking you for your reactions to the by-election, in particular the emergent threat of the Reform Party. And here's what you've got to say. June says this: I think Reform is conning the public into thinking that it can deliver options which are really unobtainable, i.e. stopping illegal migration. Well, the Tories are also saying that. They are punching above its weight, in my opinion. Colin has a different take. He says, well done, Ben Habib. He speaks sense, and I would vote for him. Ben, of course, was in the studio about an hour ago. Thirdly, Anne says this: sadly, a vote for Reform UK seems to be a vote for Labour. Now, a lot of people have been saying that overnight, particularly in the Kingswood by-election. If you add the Reform votes to the Tory votes, the Tories would have beaten the Labour Party and won that by-election. But is that even realistic anymore? Are these Tory votes, or are they simply votes, and every vote must be fought for and won? And as Ben Habib said, the Tories need to stop that sense of entitlement. Lewis says this: I've been a Conservative supporter for many, many years, but because of how the Tories are being at leading this country, we're now Reform members and I'm happy to be so. And finally, Paul adds this: Reform need to get their message over better. What are their policies that will make any difference at all to us? They all feel the same. So there we go. Thank you for getting in touch. Certainly huge food for thought, and the emergence of the Reform Party now as a third party in Britain has really got lots and lots of you talking. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock. We'll be looking at the controversial blame game going on in the entertainment venue. Can we really blame Gen Z even, for the failing of the nightlife industry? Because guess what, young people, they're giving up the booze. What on earth is wrong with them? But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much. 5:31, the headlines this hour. Boris Johnson says that the death of Alexei Navalny plunges Russia into new depths of depravity, accusing Vladimir Putin of putting him to death. His comments come as the opposition leader's wife, Yulia Navalny, told the Munich Security Conference earlier the death of her husband will not go unpunished. Other international leaders, including Volodymyr Zelensky, have also laid blame on Russia for Mr. Navalny's death, a claim echoed by the US and the EU. The Foreign Secretary, Lord David Cameron, says it's another example of Putin's dreadful regime. Two men have been arrested in the UK after a group of migrants were found in the back of a freezer lorry in East Sussex. 6 people have since been taken to hospital. We understand, though, that no deaths have been reported at this stage. The discovery of Newhaven Port this morning sparked a major emergency response. Border Force are still at the scene, continuing their investigations. 2 damaging by-election defeats have piled further pressure on the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Labour says the double win is evidence that it's a government in waiting. Overnight, Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with just over 45% of the vote. That's the second largest by-election swing from Conservative to Labour since the Second World War. That result came just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan also won in Kingswood, with just under 45% of that vote. A woman has been jailed today for 7 years for helping a person carry out female genital mutilation on a 3-year-old British girl during a trip they took to Kenya. 40-year-old Amin Noor was sentenced at the Old Bailey in London in the first conviction of its kind. The judge described it as a truly horrific and abhorrent crime. And Prince Harry has suggested that the King's cancer diagnosis could lead to reconciliation within the royal family. Speaking to Good Morning America in the US, the Duke of Sussex said he was grateful to have spent time with his father during a fleeting visit to London last week, but the conversations about the King's health would remain private. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a last look at the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2585 and €1.1689. The price of gold is £1,594.25 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed the day at 7,711 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Sam. Now, are our politicians safe? I'll be looking into the growing threats our MPs are facing every single day just for doing their jobs. Who wants to be an MP anymore with rising violence against the profession? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just think, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods
And
are
remember,
being
a lot of
trashed.
people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, the profits... I think on Clark's Farm, I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or
That's
something.
right.
And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that are being passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. I am all for green protests, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tata Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. Lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
Well,
you
it
say
can't
you
get any more
support some of
obvious.
these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the
like any of
message.
them.
But I do appreciate the
like any of
message.
them.
Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult
Nikki,
things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:38. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. It was my favourite part of the week.
Can't hear him.
Joining me now is Michelle Dewberry, because coming up after this is Jubes & Co. Here she is, a sight for sore eyes. Jubes, what's on your menu?
Hello, Martin. Yes, coming up tonight, of course, I'll be picking up on the by-election stuff. That goes without saying. So much to unpick there, isn't there? But also, I want to ask, is a holiday a human right? A row has broken out all over, should I say, about a disabled man that was receiving payments for his care. Long story short, he saved up those payments to spend on holidays. One over to Florida. The council are having none of that. They've taken the money back off him. Should they have done or not? Also, as well, should foreign governments be owning the media here in this country? And last but not least, churches. We know by now that attendance there is going down and down. But is the answer to start having alcohol-fuelled silent discos in them or not?
Gets my vote. That sounds superb. Jubes & Co. straight after this. Thank you, Michelle Dewberry. Always a pleasure to see you. You take care. Now then, I want to talk about a story that should concern all of us who believe in a democracy and free speech, and that's the threats and violence that MPs face on a daily basis. On Monday night, scores of pro-Palestine protesters descended on the family home of Tory MP Tobias Ellwood. The two MPs have been murdered in recent years. In 2016, Labour politician Joe Cox was killed by right-wing extremists, and in 2021, Tory Sir David Amess was murdered by an Islamic State terrorist. Nigel Farage and former Labour MP Stephen Pound spoke about this issue last night on the GB News election special.
It's a slight tangent, maybe not for now, but I thought what happened...
OK, so what they basically said was, who'd be a politician now? Stephen Pound said in all of his years, he's never seen it as volatile, as febrile and dangerous as it currently is now. And joining me to discuss this is the former military and intelligence officer, Philip Ingram. Philip, welcome to the show. It seems at the moment, Philip, that tensions from the Middle East are spilling onto British streets. Tensions are high, and we have a situation now where the mob are forming and they are marching on politicians' homes, sending them record amounts of death threats. And Philip, my question is, where is this going? And will it force decent people from even entering the trade in the first place?
Well, I think it is stopping decent people from entering the trade, and it's stopping good politicians remaining in the trade. We've got the government minister, Mike Freer, is leaving because his constituency office was burnt down, and he and his husband have had direct threats, and MPs seem to have normalised the threats that are there. This should not be normal in democratic society. It's okay to for MPs to have differences politically and have differences of opinion, but that shouldn't turn into the sort of hate that we're seeing out across society. And I think this is a wider societal issue where we're seeing hate being tolerated in a way that it just leads to and breeds more hate. And that's just wrong.
But Philip, does this stem from the fact that we've seen a recent outbreak, undeniably since October the 7th, of more social unrest, more civil unrest on the streets? And this emboldens people when they see the police specifically standing off and allowing this to continue. That mob gets boldened, and now they're outside politicians' houses, and not just Tories, they're doing it outside Labour Party MPs too, and it creates an atmosphere of toxicity. And in the end, MPs like Mike Freer will simply remove themselves from the profession or never join it in the first place. And that is not a free and democratic society. That is the thin end of totalitarianism.
Oh, I agree completely. And I think that's part of the problem. I think the police not reacting very visibly whenever crimes are being committed and whenever you're getting these sorts of situations just emboldens other groups to go and do the same. But I think there's a much bigger problem beneath this. We've heard we've got politics by soundbite now, and a lot of the soundbites that we hear coming out from some very senior politicians in the very recent past have been hate-filled. And if we're getting our politicians, our leaders within the country, or those that are aspiring to be our leaders in the country, coming out with hate speech, how can we then start to go and criticise that coming out from people in all the different groups and elsewhere? And since the 7th of October attacks, there's been a 589% increase in anti-Semitic activity across the country, and that isn't being stamped on hard, both by the police but also by general society. It's all of us. We've all got a responsibility here. If you see any unacceptable behaviour, most people will turn their heads and shrink away from it and hide and say, I'll not get involved in case something happens to me. That's wrong in a society.
OK, Philip, let's just listen to that clip now between Stephen Pound and Nigel Farage from last night.
It's a slight tangent, maybe not for now, but I thought what happened outside Mr. Elwood's home in Bournemouth 2 nights ago, with nearly 100 people protesting for 4 hours.
Family home.
Screaming at... I mean, Stephen's been an MP, I've been an MP. You know, we can all put up with a bit of stick.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that comes up. You stick your head above the parapet and you expect.
Of course.
And I think we take it. And as somebody said earlier on, we're all grown-ups now. But I've never seen anything like this.
Awful, wasn't it?
This is the worst that I've ever seen. And in my own patch, we got groups of people with megaphones screaming outside the MP surgeries. But to actually get that, I remember when I was Stephen Timms' PPS when he got stabbed, and of course, we've lost 2 good MPs.
Yeah. It's too easily forgotten that in the last 10 years there have been 2 political assassinations.
And so many good people. I know people in business, entrepreneurs, who have thought about politics.
They won't touch it with a barge.
And they're scared of it. Yeah. They're scared of it. They're also scared of social media. Yeah. They're scared of the fact that every mobile phone's a camera. There's no privacy. And look, let's not link this to Mr. Egan. It wouldn't be fair. But a general point, we are not getting high calibre people going for Parliament.
And Philip, isn't that the inevitable outcome, that the strong won't get involved and we'll end up with more identikit politicians, more bland politicians, and the best brains will just go and do other things?
Well, it is. There's nothing that would encourage anyone that I know to go into politics, because they get ripped to pieces in every way, shape, or form. And whenever you're getting this sort of level of attacks on them, it just detracts even further. I do know that the parliamentary security people, along with the police, are putting an awful lot of effort into making sure that every MP gets a proper risk assessment. They do for their surgeries, because they have to engage with the public in their constituencies. And there's an increased amount of advice that's been given to them. Those projects I have been briefed on and know the organisations that are putting those together. So there's a lot of effort being put in to try and keep things safe. But when we see pictures like we did from outside Tobias Ellwood's house and the police not doing anything, that sends the wrong message. The police need to start being much more robust and stopping these things, because that was hugely threatening behaviour aimed at not just him but his family.
Common sense spoken there. And if they don't get a grip soon, Philip Ingram, I think we could see another tragedy, and nobody wants that. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, Philip Ingram. Now, moving on, former Immigration Minister Robert Gendrick says security services are worried that extremists are crossing the channel on small boats. Kel Surprise, we've been saying that for years. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, and we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:49 on Friday afternoon, and you're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, 6 migrants have been taken to hospital after they were found in the back of a lorry at Newhaven Ferryport. Two men have been arrested, and former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says security services are worried that extremists are crossing the channel on small boats. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Kevin Saunders, who's the former Chief Immigration Officer at UK Border Force. Welcome to the show, Kevin. It's always a pleasure. What's taken them so long to wake up to this, Kev? I mean, we've been saying, people like you and I have been saying it for years and years and years. We have no idea who's crossing the channel. If they throw their documents into the channel, they come over there, we don't know who they are. They can say whoever they are. Now, finally, Robert Jenrick says, hey, these people could be a danger. It's like, what took them so long?
Well, indeed. Good evening, Martin. Yeah, you are quite right. What has taken them so long to wake up? It is a huge problem, and we've been saying this for donkey's years. We don't know who these people are that are coming across the channel, whether they're coming on the boats or backs of lorries. We have no idea who they are, and that is a big concern. And what's more of a concern is that we've lost 17,000 of these people. Now, they're not all terrorists, but they're not people that are here to help the British economy, because they've disappeared into the unregulated economy. So it is a big problem. The answer, unfortunately, is to detain everybody that arrived here illegally, put them all into detention. But of course, that would be totally unacceptable to the politicians, and it would cost an absolute fortune. But until we have another 7-7 or something like that, they won't even think about it. We do need to detain these people.
And a lot of people, Kevin, will agree with that. But, of course, we have a system that seems hell-bent on allowing anything like that to happen. And, in fact, in this specific incident, Kevin, the Home Office had allowed that these people were going to be allowed into Britain because, of course, they can't process the backlog fast enough. Kevin, 31,900 small boat migrants in the asylum system were just going to be waved into the country because they couldn't be processed within 1 year, which meant they had to be granted automatic right to remain. And only 23 of that entire lot have been deported. And at the 11th hour, this decision is paused by Robert Jenrick, who says there's a well-evidenced connection between those arriving illegally and serious criminality. Kevin, I say once again, this is basic stuff. You and I have been saying this for blooming years, mate.
Yes, it is. It is completely basic. Robert Jenrick is now saying what he should have been saying perhaps when he was the minister. He's being a little bit wise after the event, isn't he? But he's right. The thing is, he's right. We are the 30,000 that you're talking about. I think are people that we couldn't remove anyway, because they come from the 5 countries that we've got no hope of removing people to, because there's wars going on in those countries anyway, so we couldn't remove them. But that doesn't mean that they're not people that we should be very careful about. And I mean, I believe that there were 19 that were of interest to the security services. But let me tell you a little story. When we had Operation Pitting, the people flying people out of Afghanistan, we had Border Force officers actually in Afghanistan who were doing checks on people that were coming out. And we found 2 on one of the flights that were definitely not the sort of people we would want in the UK. And in fact, they were prevented from disembarking in the UK and flown straight back to Afghanistan. So we do have some successes, but they're not huge.
Of course, Kevin, those are the ones that we intercept or even know about. Kevin Saunders, thank you very much for joining us, former Chief Immigration Officer at UK Border Force. It really makes you wonder sometimes, if the lunatics have taken over the asylum system, how can you seriously say that serious criminals could be on dinghies? Of course they could, if they're throwing their documents in the channel. We have no idea who these people are. Today, we've seen 6 come in on the back of a lorry. They're going to lorries now. They're closing the dinghies. Round and round we go. so astonishing stuff. But look, I'm finished for another week. I'll be back on Monday. Parliament will be back, so I'll be having this studio filled with politicians. I've been grilling them so hard, I'll need to get myself a new apron. Thanks for joining myself on the show. After this, it's Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. Stick around, always lots on her menu. But thanks for joining me this week and have a fantastic Friday evening. Thank you very much.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, I'm Alex Bergill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. We do have some pretty wet weather on the cards as we go through later tomorrow, but for the time being, it's a largely dry picture. That's because we do have a weak ridge of higher pressure across the UK, and it's this that's quietened things down a little bit. That being said, there are still some showery outbreaks of rain around at the moment, and a few of these will continue as we go through the end of the day. Some clear skies through the start of the night, particularly towards the east, before a swathe of thicker cloud pushes its way into western parts, and this is likely to bring some drizzly outbreaks of rain, particularly in the west. For most, though, staying relatively mild, perhaps a little fresher than some recent nights, but temperatures in many places holding up in high single figures, if not double digits. The best chance of any sunshine tomorrow will be across parts of Scotland and in the east first thing. However, it is going to turn